I'm not the one born of the gods, but I will present today. And we'll look at another topic that's covered in this Pharaoh exhibition. So this is a text that is from the website here. I'll let you read through it. Through the creation of complex myths, thousands of gods populated the lives of the ancient Egyptians. All natural entities could be divine manifestations. The land, the wind, animals, all embodied in a sacred force. Although human, pharaohs claimed divine ancestry. They acted as the gods' representatives on earth and intermediaries between gods and the humans. So the pharaoh's main role, we have in past presentations heard about it, is to maintain the well-being of the gods, and is seen in many of the presentations where he's the high priest and he brings offerings and does many different religious activities, and he takes care of those religious duties because the belief was that the gods provided stability and prosperity to the country and for Egypt, and in return the pharaohs built them stuff like temples and other things, and performed daily rituals, and this relationship benefited both. So it's like kind of like a symbiosis. And the king's position on the throne was secured because he was the favorite of the gods and he was like the top one. You remember this pyramid? Pharaoh is at the top and the slaves are at the bottom. So, what kind of gods did they believe in? I don't know if you know this guy with this nice one here. I think it's Anubis, probably with this nice mullet. And the pharaohs were believed to be associated with the deities in different ways. So the myth is basically Egypt was ruled by gods and originally governed by gods before the first human king, and the pharaoh was considered an incarnation of Horus. So Horus should be the last divine ruler, that's their belief. And at his death, each king is transformed into the god Osiris. He is the father of Horus and lord of the underworld, and the successor becomes the new Horus on earth. So it's like a never-ending circle, kind of this. And the images that symbolize the pharaoh's relationship to the gods, they were everywhere. You can see it in the walls of the tombs, in ancient Egyptian temples, and other scenes. They have often this creation mythology, and they show offerings being made to the gods, and in return for a fertile Nile flood and a prosperous reign. For example, this is the mythological royal family, the Egyptian mythological royal family. So, does this work? Anyway, on the left is Isis. She is the mother and the wife of Osiris, but also the sister, of this guy. So, all in one. And we have the...
How does that work?
I don't know the mother, the wife and the sister.
Oh, okay, like the mother.
Still, no comment. Seth is the brother of this guy, and Horus is the son of those two. So what happened was, let me get this right, Osiris was murdered by his brother Seth, who is a trickster and the god of chaos and desert and war. And he became lord of the underworld because he was dead. And Seth then also attempted to kill his nephew Horus to take the power over Egypt for himself. So it's a very bloodthirsty family line, and this is basically like the royal Egyptian family. And the pharaoh is to be considered a reincarnation of Horus. What happened? Sorry, there's a glitch. Remember this boy? He's now a grown man in this picture, like a young man, but he's one of the longest reigning pharaohs, and we see quite a lot of him in the exhibition from his over, I think, 54 years of rule. And here you see him as a baby. So Thutmose III wanted to show that he has divine protection and legitimation to be pharaoh, to be from the gods. So you can see here he's with kind of like identified with Horus. He is nursed by various goddesses. This is a snake god, Renéutette. I'm pronouncing it German as I can. This is easier. And by drinking her milk, a liquid connection to purification and resurrection, the king was united with her divine powers. So this piece can be found in the exhibition. Keep an eye on it. So the snake god Renéutette and Thutmose III as the god Horus. We have another thing This is called, let me get this right, spacer bead, was used as a piece of jewelry to separate several strands of beads. So this one, can you spot the pharaoh? You remember the sign? Cobra, yeah. So he's in the middle, he's being purified with water by two gods, probably the falcon-headed Horus and the ibis-headed Thoth, whatever. And the scene symbolizes the coronation of the pharaoh. This is like the front. And the backside shows the sun god Ra with a falcon head. In the middle, he is holding a bound enemy, symbolizing Egypt's power over foreign nations. They love to show their enemies like as slaves, like you remember from the shoe label and other things. It's just like the inscription, the symbolism of power. So they always like to portray themselves as being in control and in charge. Yeah, keep an eye out on this piece in the exhibition as well.
Big or small?
I think it's made for some jewelry stuff. I imagine it's like for their beads in the hair. I have no idea. Probably. So another thing that I actually find, I think I'll look out for this one especially. I like the goose. So this is about the god, the most powerful solar deity, worshipped, the god Ra. He's usually represented as the sun at midday with a red circle. And one of the main titles, royal titles of the pharaoh was the son of Ra. And so the hieroglyphs seen on this fragment somewhere, I think this was used as like his prefix before his name. This one was found in the tomb of Seti in the Valley of the Kings, where they found lots of artifacts and fragments. And it emphasizes the divine ancestry. And so the goose and the red disc, they read son of Ra together. And yeah, I'm going to look out for this one because I like this one, looks cool. And now another one. This one was from Osiris, the lord of the underworld. Was one of the gods thought to have ruled Egypt. So they often, the Egyptian kings often identified themselves as being like the shepherd or the keeper of the country. And so they had a crook, and there's also another thing, it's called the flail, I think, but I didn't include it here now. So this is probably from around 1000 to 300 BC, so one of the later dynasties. And this is also in the exhibition, just to show you the different things. So this one, a lot is going on here. Can you spot the two pharaohs again? Yeah. There is one with the cobra and another one on the other side. So these are actually, it says their names. I cannot read it, so I trust the people who translate it in the hieroglyphs. The one on the left is Thutmose III again. He is offering Maat. You can see this one here. This is called Maat. It's a goddess and a concept of truth, justice, and order to Amon-Ra, the first one, and then it continues with Mut, Khons, and Hathor, who are sitting behind an altar, and on the other side is King Amenhotep, and he's offering ointment jars to, again, Amon-Ra with the ram head, and then this one is Khnum, Safed, and Anuket, and they also like sit behind this kind of altar thing. So the two pharaohs and 8 gods, I think. So this one here is, I think it's a lintel, like a sandstone lintel, so it's something that was on the top of the door, and this one can also be seen in the museum. I'm not sure if it's like the original piece of stone or if it's like a, like a copy of it, because maybe it has been eroded or something. But yeah, this one shows how the pharaoh is connected with the gods and as a whole, and the religion and the gods they base their faith on. So it's really hard it's almost impossible to keep up with all the Egyptian history. So tonight we're going to focus, because it's over 3,000 years, so tonight we're just going to look at a very particular part. In the 18th dynasty, there was like a time of very prosperous reign of some pharaohs, and I'm going to zoom in on this one particular time frame because this is a time that's also covered in the biblical account of Exodus, and it describes many people, places, and events that unfolded during the time. So keep in mind there's quite a few different views and calculations of the time, like the years especially, of the dynasties. So the dates of certain pharaohs can be off by a few decades depending on when they looked at it. So this is in general the time frame that we're going to look at, and it's one of the most widely accepted and plausible ones. So it's the time of the Exodus. There is a certain Moses. There is a particular Pharaoh who didn't want to let his people go, and the outcome of these decisions. So we have those two. This is Hatshepsut and Thutmose II. They were partners and also half-sister and half-brother. And Thutmose II was a weak and apparently sickly pharaoh, so he reigned only for a few years. And after that, he was also known for being very brutal and being one who ordered babies to be killed, newborn babies from the Hebrew slaves. The practice of this time seemed to be kind of what they did, killing the male children of enemies. So this sounds familiar to what we can see in the Exodus account in the Bible. And this pharaoh, shortly after that, I think he died, and then his wife, Hatshepsut, became pharaoh, and she has been pharaoh for 22 years, I think. 22 co-regency. Yeah. So she fits into the time frame that could be the pharaoh's daughter that found Moses in the river. So this fits in that timeline. While this guy died, she was the pharaoh in charge during that time. And I hope she stopped the horrible practice of killing children. And it was a peaceful time when she reigned. And at that time, her stepson also was too young. He was like 2 years old, so she was like the alone pharaoh. It's always the pharaoh's daughter. So she was the one in charge. And then, again. So yeah, there were two sons, I think. Is this correct? Yeah. One was Amenhotep. He was the firstborn. He died early. And Amenhotep II. He becomes the next pharaoh. Sorry, I was a bit too fast. We're going to Thutmose III. Sorry. Thutmose III, like I said, he reigned 54 years. One of the longest one, and he was sole monarch, and he became Egypt's greatest, like he was called Napoleon of Egypt, I think. Yeah, that was his name because he conquered so many areas, and so he expanded the empire to a really big area. So this was the Thutmose III, and he spent much, his reign spent much of the first half of the 15th century. And during that time, there is a good chronological fit with Moses that he was during the time. And when Moses fled to Midian's wilderness, and he lived for a significant length of time. So this fits into it that he died and then Moses came back, and one of his sons, Amenhotep II, becomes the next pharaoh. And this is the guy, Amenhotep II. And they show that he was pharaoh when he was 18, and he reigned for 26 years. And he also was a very courageous and like really ambitious ruler, like his dad. He wanted to conquer many things, but suddenly it kind of stopped in the middle, so it didn't really turn out as he planned to. So we can see also that even though he was like a young king and followed in the footsteps, then his military campaign stopped, and he had only one where he captured like 100,000 slaves. We'll come back to that later, why he might have done that. So also, this one did a few building projects, but not as impressive as his father's one. So his father built many temples and cities, but not this one. And this stele on the left one, this is in the Vienna Kunsthistorische Museum, apparently. And what it describes is that he is a cruel and ruthless pharaoh. I'm going to spare you the details, but the pharaohs, like we stated, they love to depict how they crush the enemies. And this one apparently really enjoyed like being cruel and horrible to his enemies. Like the Egyptians itself, they brag about it, how horrible he was. And so this one also fits really good to what it says in the Exodus record, that he was had a hardened heart and was had all those different ways of punishing other people. One second. So, as we have seen, the Egyptians, like many other pagan cultures, they worshipped lots of gods and attributed the powers to the natural phenomena they saw in the world around them. God of the sun, river, childbirth, everything was like a god to them. And so it was during that time, Moses, who, like I said, he fled from Egypt, returned because he had a mission. God told him, please go and tell the Pharaoh to let my people go and free them from slavery. And so we have seen that the Pharaoh believed that he was the incarnation of God, right? He was the highest one, so he didn't want to let anyone else tell him what to do. And he, Amenhotep II especially, who he was proud of the state of the empire, had a large territory, it was prosperous, like the 18th dynasty, lots of wealth. He had a large free workforce through the slaves, and in general he lived his best life. So it's stated that he, in Exodus 5:1-2, it says when Moses comes to him, they went to Pharaoh, Moses and his brother Aaron, and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, let my people go, so they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Basically, let the slaves go. He said, "Who is the Lord? I should obey him and let Israel go. I do not know the Lord, I will not let Israel go." So you can see his assumes that he's the highest and he is the God, basically. So this is his approach to that. He didn't accept any other higher power above him, as he believed to be the highest God that exists. So who were those slaves? Let's quickly look at them. They were so important to God, but also to the Pharaoh. So the Israelites at the time had been in Egypt for almost 400 years, and at that time they had lost faith. They had lost the faith in the God of their fathers. They believed he existed and worshipped him, but they had no hope. They doubted that he could or would break the yoke of the bondage, and they had no hope of salvation from the misery, because it has been so long. Imagine from 1600 until today, you're like slave, and your fathers and grandfather and everyone you know has been a slave, and you just work long hours. So they worked really long hours building treasure cities for the Egyptians, and there's an illustration of those Semitic slaves. This one, they make bricks for the construction projects of the Pharaoh, and this is from the tomb of Rekhmire, a high official of Amenhotep II, showing them making bricks from water, mud, and straw. So after that request, "Please let my people go," or rather, "let my people go," Pharaoh was so upset from that request, he told them, "No, instead, lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That's why you keep saying, 'Let's go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks." So the bricks were made out of water, mud, and straw. And he said, "No, we don't provide straw to you anymore. You gather this for yourself." So basically, it made their life much harder. So, and this proclamation from Pharaoh to ignore the higher power, especially the God of their slaves, they marked the beginning of what we know today as the 10 plagues. There are signs, there are disasters done by God, as it's stated in the Bible. And in order to free the Hebrew slaves from the Egyptians, from their masters, and this freedom from slavery for the Hebrew slaves is what is called Exodus. This is basically the thing that's happened there. So these signs, So Moses was sent there. Okay. Yeah. So the Egyptians' plagues were harsh and they varied to correspond to the ancient gods that they believed in. That's why they were so different in style. And this was during the time of Moses, to those goddesses that they believed. And they came always with a notice period and the opportunity to avoid them by allowing them to go. So began the challenge to show whose god was more powerful. Was it the Egyptians' god, or was it the god of the slaves? So I'm not going through all of them, just a few select ones. But just a note before that, some historians believe that there is actually no evidence for that, and archaeologists, they claim that there is nothing to support the Bible account of the exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt. However, there are multiple times where the Bible has been accurately claiming historical facts that were later discovered by archaeological findings, and historians agree that, like the nations of the Hittites, the kingdom of David, or Pontius Pilate, among other things. There was one Egyptologist, he doesn't claim to be a Christian, David Rohl. He wrote 2 books on how biblical accounts relate to Egypt. Joseph and Moses are astonishingly accurate. He believes Joseph and Moses were historic characters and cites Bronze Age slave lists containing Hebrew names and the grave goods of an underclass discovered at the area where they lived, the biblical Goshen, and Egyptian plague pits full of skeletal remains. It's also known, like I mentioned before, Egyptians love to portray that they are powerful and victorious, so you can imagine that they probably wouldn't put the slaves and anyone else in their tombs and temples to give them some kind of honor, so they wouldn't like to mention that at all. So if you're open to the possibility that these plagues were also historical facts, there is the Ipuwer papyrus an ancient document that provides a possible independent record of the 10 plagues in Egypt. It describes a great disaster that took place in ancient Egypt, and the oldest copy dates to around 1400 BC, which is close to the time of the Exodus, around 1446 BC, so maybe 46 years after that. So let's now look at a few of those and at the biblical account of the plagues compared with this papyrus and how they relate to the gods and how the Pharaoh reacted. So the first one, it says here, Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh, and the official and struck the water of the Nile, and the water was changed into blood. So the first plague forms the basis is against the Nile River, which is the basis of the daily life and the national economy in Egypt. And it devastated millions of fish, and they died, and the water was unusable. So can you remember this map of Egypt? Like where the river is just like a tiny little thing, and everyone lives basically around the river and the delta of the Nile. So if the water is unusable, then you can imagine it affects virtually everyone. So this disaster affected them all. And in the papyrus it says, plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere. The river is blood, you can read it, men shrink from touching human beings. So really horrible situation that they had there. And this was against the goddess Hapi, god of the Nile, Isis, also goddess of the Nile, and Khnum, guardian of the Nile. So there was a judgment against them because the Nile was believed to be the bloodstream of Osiris, who was reborn each year when the river flooded. So this was like the one thing that kept them all alive. And the river formed the basis of daily life, like I said. And the magicians of Pharaoh were actually partially able to replicate that. So the Pharaoh was not impressed with this wonder from God. And it lasted for 7 days and throughout all the land of Egypt. And they had to endure the time. And after that, we're going to skip a few of them. We go to plague number 4, which were the flies. I'm going to read. But on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, which is where the Hebrew slaves lived. Where my people live, no swarms of flies will be there, so that you will know that I am the Lord in his land. I'll make a distinction between my people and your people. Sign will occur tomorrow. So I had a warning of 1 day. And the Lord did this. Then swarms of flies poured into Pharaoh's palace and into the house of official throughout Egypt, the land ruined by the flies. I wanted to include this one because he has a fly head. This was against Khepri Uatchit. You pronounce however you wanted. He was the god of creation, sun movement, and rebirth. And there was a judgment on him in this plague. And this also moves the plagues to a different level because now people can feel them. Now it's like personal. The flies annoy you and they get into your face and everywhere. And the Pharaoh tried a new tactic now. He begins bargaining with God's requests, and he says, oh yeah, maybe he tries to maintain the power and authority. He tries to dictate the terms and conditions that they may sacrifice not only in the land, but they wanted to go away. So he wanted to have this way. But Moses said, no, that's not possible. We cannot do this. So the Pharaoh learned a little bit who God is, like what he can do, because we're at plague number 4 here, but he still is not willing to relent to this request. He actually asks Moses, hey, can you take this thing away? Moses goes to God and the flies removed, so then he's back to worshipping his gods. Then we have the 5th one. This one was given with an advanced warning and allowed a period of repentance to occur, but it didn't happen. He said, if you refuse to let them go, continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, on your cattle, sheep, and goats. Next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but no one animal belonging to the Israelites died. In the papyrus, the Egyptians themselves recorded it as all animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. Behold, cattle are left astray, and there is none to gather them together. This one was against Hathor. You might remember that you have seen it in one of those 8 gods with the 2 pharaohs. She was the goddess of love and protection, often portrayed like with a cattle style, kind of, with the horns. And also, I think it was against the god Apis. They were both depicted as cattle. I haven't put him here. So God protected also again his people from the plague, while the cattle of the Egyptians died. Pharaoh even sent investigators into the land to find out what happened. And they found out they didn't suffer from this plague. but he just got more angry and hardened, so he didn't change. So this, of course, affected the Egyptians by creating huge economic disaster in areas of food, transportation, military supplies, farming, because it was not just the cows, but the horses as well, and economic goods that were produced by these livestock. And the Pharaoh still remained hard. He would not listen to the Lord, and he would not give up his slaves, but he would believe his goddesses in the hope that they would help him. Then number 6, just quickly going through this one. They got boils, and the magicians could not stand before Moses, which they did previously because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. And this was against the god of Isis, who was a medicine goddess and peace goddess, Sekhmet and Sunu. Those 3, they were like gods over health and disease. So when it says the magicians couldn't be there because they were affected by this one as well, Egyptians put really high importance on cleanliness and hygiene. So this was really important to them. Can you remember they shaved their heads and everything? Like they just didn't bother with that. So this was especially hard for them because it made them unclean. So they couldn't, even the magicians couldn't go to the Pharaoh and be in his presence. So they were unable to perform the ceremonial rituals to their gods and goddesses in this unclean state, and they couldn't stand before Pharaoh, like we can see in this. We cannot read anything about the magicians anymore from now on. This actually, as a side note, is Amenhotep II. His mummy was covered in unexplainable boils. He was found 1907, his mummified body, and scientists noted that he had unusual tubercles, how I would pronounce it, all over the body, like small ones. And actually, in fact, when he died, he was one of the most athletic pharaohs. So he died in his 40s or something. He was young and healthy at the time. And he bragged, I think I read, he bragged about shooting some arrows through a metal shield, and it went through, and he was so proud that he was so strong. But then you find him in that state, like he had some kind of disease, so probably not from old age or something. So we don't know exactly what it was, if it's from the embalming effect, other pharaohs didn't have it, or if it really was from those boils at that time. So just leave this one here. And gonna skip one, I think, or maybe not this one, I keep this one. So disaster number 7, God even warns the Pharaoh to gather whatever cattle he can. I haven't put it here. And then he tells them to hide them in the stable so they would not be affected by the next one. The next one is hail that came down and destroyed everything, the worst storm in the land of Egypt since they had become a nation. And the papyrus records it as, forsooth, whatever this means, gates, columns and walls are consumed by fire. Lower Egypt weeps, which is the land where the pharaohs ruled. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belong by night wheat and barley, geese and fish. So they recorded that the land is left over to its weariness like the cutting of flax. It was really a disaster for them. And this was against Nut, goddess of the sky, Osiris, god of the fertility, and Seth, god of the storm. Remember, this is the chaos trickster god of war and chaos. And it attacked them by destroying the crops, Osiris, the fertility god, and bringing this chaos from the sky down. And the division is felt between the Egyptians and between the slaves who were not affected by that. And it seems also that some Egyptians realized that their gods cannot help them anymore because there are some who actually protect their cattle and the rest of the animals. So we come to, skip one and come to plague number 9, and just keep this one short. Darkness comes over the land for 3 days, and this is all that the papyrus say. The land is without light. And this must have been a horrible psychological effect because this is against Ra, the sun god, which is the highest god that they had. The 9th plague was aimed at the sun god Ra, and the land of Egypt had an unearthly darkness, and the sun was the most worshipped god in Egypt. Like we know this, they loved the sun and they worshipped it a lot, other than Pharaoh himself. And there was no light, so God was showing, I have control over that light. I'm higher than those Pharaoh and higher than the sun god that they believed in. And the psychological religious impact would have been horrible, like living in darkness and as like a representation of death and hopelessness, because there's nothing that can do. And this was a complete absence of light. And this one was the 10th and the last one. This was the death of the firstborn. So every household, basically God through Moses warned the Pharaoh like 9 times, let me go, but he refused, he bargained, he didn't want to, he broke his promise, he went back to his old ways, his old gods. And then he said, okay, this one is the last one. Remember, the Egyptians killed the babies and they were just, in that way, not innocent. So he said, the firstborn son of everything, basically, summarized, will die. Humans and animals. And in the papyrus it says, forsooth, the children of princes are dashed against the walls. The children of princes are cast out in the street. He who places his brother in the ground buries him everywhere. It's groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentation. So this was the final thing. They were completely devastated. I'm going to spare you any pictures of that or any artistic interpretations. This was directly against Pharaoh, the son, the reincarnated son of Ra. He was the king. He was worshipped by them because he was considered to be the greatest one. And after the plague of darkness, Pharaoh returned to his position of bargaining again, but this time he even was so angry at Moses, he just said, get out of my face. If I see you again, I kill you. So I was okay, I will never see you again. So then this one happened. At this point, the people of Israel were also asked to show their faith in the God that would free them. So they were asked to put some blood from a lamb on the doorposts, and actually some Egyptians also did this, so they were saved as well during that night, because this is something also that historians cannot explain, why it didn't affect them, but the Egyptians. It didn't touch them. From the biblical account, we have an explanation why this happened, why they were protected. So the Pharaoh broke at that point, but what did it cost him? At every point during those plagues, he could have said, no, okay, stop, I'm gonna let you go, I've had enough, but he refused. He chose to sacrifice his own people, like in the plagues before, even his own son, instead of admitting that he indeed was not a god and letting go of his pride and stubbornness. So this was really he got ample of warning. So what then? Aftermath. Just a quick timeline, just to know where we are in the timeline. So this is basically where this all happened. This is the Pharaoh, Amenhotep II, and this is then the Israelites leave, and these are other pharaohs. So basically, the land is destroyed and is emptier than before. I'll stop the story of the Exodus here, as it continues for many more years, and this Pharaoh Amenhotep unfortunately didn't really learn anything, because he chased after the freed slaves and through the desert to try to get them back after a few days, after he had mourned his firstborn son. And spoiler alert, he was not successful to get them back. We don't see much more of this Pharaoh, and like I mentioned before, the only thing is he got 100,000 new slaves from somewhere. So this was the biggest amount of slaves that any Pharaoh captured in one expedition. And probably to replenish the missing ones would be the explanation why he did this. Because he missed a lot of his workforce in this devastated land. So his successor, Amenhotep's son and heir, was Pharaoh Thutmose IV. He would reign for just 9 years in the second half of the 15th century. It was a short reign, but we know that it was a surprise that he reigned, because he built a stele, dream stele, is it correct pronounced, stele? Something, inscription between the paws of the Sphinx. And in it, it's 4 meters high, granite inscription. He said, he gave basically a unique and unusual divine justification for his reign. Why am I now the Pharaoh? Why is it me? Why did he have to publicly proclaim that he is the Pharaoh, that he is divinely installed? As we have concluded from the string of events, he was not the firstborn, he was the secondborn. And so he had to give an explanation why he's now the Pharaoh and not the firstborn, like it was usually the case. So this could be because the firstborn died in the 10th plague. Oops. And then, like his son, and also unlike most other pharaohs, Amenhotep III, Thutmose's fourth son, he was a peaceful pharaoh. There were no expeditions, only one to the south, but not to Canaan, where the Hebrew slaves went. So he was characterized as a pacifist. Remember, the pharaohs always like strength and power and subduing the enemies. He was a pacifist. He didn't do many like bad or unusual things, but what he did is he devoted, was it here, 600, I think, statues to the goddess of healing, Sekhmet. Sekhmet, yeah. Why no wars? Why no healing? Maybe because the land was devastated. Maybe because he wanted to ask the gods, please heal the country, heal whatever we have left. It's interesting that he was the one, and his son was the one and the only one who removed the whole system of gods and goddesses called what's the name of this one? Akhenaten, yeah, this one. I know the German name, but Echnaton. Anyway, he worshipped only one monotheistic sun disk god, which he called Aten. And after that, they removed this stuff as well. But this happened shortly after what they had seen, that their gods couldn't help them. So this might be the implication why he did this. So this is Amenhotep III. So, what are the conclusions from what we have learned today? We have not only seen some of the gods and goddesses in Egypt we can look for in the exhibition, but also we have seen how the belief in those deities was challenged during that time. And if you read the whole story in the book of Exodus, Pharaoh actually admitted a few times, okay, I did wrong, you are right, to Moses, but he quickly broke his promises and turned back to the gods who couldn't help him. Tragically, this resulted in the consequence of many people dying from the various plagues that came to Egypt. His bad decisions had such a profound impact on a nation, and what I didn't mention before, during the order of the killing for the newborn babies, there were actually 2 midwives from the slaves, 2 Hebrew midwives, who refused the order. Hopefully all of them did, but those 2 I mentioned. And they didn't take part into this horrible killing and saved many, many lives of countless babies. So we have seen also that the God of the Bible is actually a God of the underdogs, the savior of the broken, beaten, and the slaves, and he brings justice to them, while the gods of the Egypt is like the Pharaoh, one of the main ones being more than happy to keep them enslaved and keep them in their bondage and in their state, and use them for free labor. So just as a quick refresher, we can look for this one here. Thutmose, the baby, with the snake goddess you know this one, Renéutette, the space beads, which is like blue-greenish thing, which has the Pharaoh and some gods on there as well. We have the goose and the red sun disk, which is Ra, and we have the shepherd's crook, a symbol of Osiris, as a symbol of power. And we have this lintel in sandstone, lintel of Amenhotep, 1, not the 2 that we talked about, but 1, and Thutmose the 3rd. So, thank you for listening.